So basically, this webinar is about fractional ownership. I'm assuming that you all know nothing about it at all. So essentially, fractional ownership is the way of more than one person buying a property at the same time and being co-owners. It essentially works that you have a limited company, if it's a UK company, but either way, a company in a jurisdiction where shares can change hands easily online. So in Italy, for example, you wouldn't do it with an Italian company because every time there's a change of shareholders, you have to go to the notary. And one of the advantages with fractional ownership is that if people have a share in a property, they can sell their share at any time. So basically, the limited company buys the property. And so all of the owners actually own the property. It's not like timeshare, where you have a right to use the property for a certain number of days a year. You can use the property a number of days a year because depending the years divided up into however many shareholders there are, but it's done on an equitable first come, first served basis. So that essentially there's a management company who looks after all the owners and who works out who's coming when. It means that the ideal property for fractional ownership is something which can be used either the whole property at once or splits into smaller units because that gives the owners more flexible use. So, for example, we're working on a project in Galatina, in Puglia at the moment, which is a four-bedroom property, but it can also work as three separate units. So, why do fractional ownership? Well, property prices here have been going up really quite fast. And I come across a lot of people in my consultancy work whose budget just doesn't stretch to what they want. So, sort of champagne tastes and beer pockets. So, obviously, it is much cheaper just having the amount of time in a property you think you're going to use. The other reason why it's a good idea is that renting out property in Italy. So, unless you're actually moving to Italy, the property is going to be empty a lot of the time because you'll be limited by entrance and exit regulations. So, for example, in the Schengen Shuffle, where you can only be there 90 days out of every 180. Um, but renting a property in Italy now, um, you're not, as an individual, you can't offset any of your rental costs. So you can't offset agency costs or cleaning or someone to check people in or out or your bills. And setting up a company in Italy is a production and it's quite expensive to run. So a lot of people come to the conclusion that it's actually not worth renting their property when they're not there, unless it's a long let, because they have very little to show for it at the end. The beauty of having a share in a fractional ownership property is that the management agency can also look after rentals for you. So if one year you want to use it less, then you'll get a rental income from your share of the nights that you don't use. Another advantage of fractional ownership is that at the moment, Australians, Canadians can't buy in Italy because it relies on a reciprocal arrangement between the two governments. And because Australia and Canada have both tightened up on who can buy there, unless you have a European passport or a different passport, you won't be able to buy property in Italy. But obviously, this way, you're buying shares in a company that then buys the property, and obviously, there's no limitation at all to you doing that. So those are really the sort of advantages of doing it. But the other thing is a lot of people who are thinking maybe of moving to Italy or making a bigger investment want to explore areas first, want to see if they actually like it, want to try before they buy. And the advantage with fractional is because you can sell your shares at any time. You can have a share in a property, use it for as long as it suits you. And then if your circumstances change or if you find your own dream property, you can just sell your shares on. And also, if you need your money back in a hurry, it's much quicker to sell shares than to sell a whole property. And again, in an ideal world, the management company, and certainly in our project, will sell shares for people. and we anticipate having a waiting list for shares further down the line. So that's another good reason for doing it. The other thing as well is that basically a lot of people who maybe aren't with a partner or are traveling on their own, no matter how independent they are worried about being isolated. And again, we've had lots of inquiries from people in that situation who like the idea of our current project because it can be three separate units. But actually, if it's three separate units occupied by more than one person at a time, then there's company if they want it. But it gives you greater flexibility. So essentially, you can either come with your whole family and your friends and take up, in this case, all four bedrooms, or you can come on your own. You can come for a weekend. You can come for 2 months. It's entirely flexible. Um, Tina, yes, you're right. Canadians can buy, but a rural area of less than 10,000 population isn't ideal for most people. Again, a lot of notaries aren't experienced, but I've come across people who've reached out and said help because they haven't been told they can't do it by anyone. And at the last minute, the notary's double checked and the whole thing's sort of fallen apart, which is soul destroying. So yeah, it's limiting. And also the rules change so quickly. So I've had a lot of Australian clients in the past, and then all of a sudden Australians can't buy anymore, for example. So that's that's really the situation. The main thing with fractional, and I can envisage absolutely a position whereby we will end up helping people who want something different from our current project, um, and adding more projects to it, and then putting people together, almost matchmaking. The disadvantages of fractional for some people is that you don't get to restore your own house. So essentially, in the case of our project, we would be doing all the decor, all the finishes, and everything else, and the furnishing and the equipment. Um, but we would be absolutely in touch with owners as we went along, and if anyone absolutely hated something, we wouldn't do it. Got quite a lot of previous examples of work we've done, but also because you can sell the shares quickly. Um, if you don't like it at the end, you just sell your shares on. It's not usual. In a lot of cases, fractional properties, you pay a premium for the fractions. So it costs more than it would if you buy something directly. Um, in our case, we're not doing that. And instead, we're actually doing that people who are in from the beginning can buy their share for actually what it costs. So what the purchase costs, what the restoration costs. And it's usual in Puglia when you restore a property that it will be worth, if you know what you're doing, it'll be worth 30% more than what you spent on it. Um, Obviously, if you're overpaying for the work, that might not be the case. But so in this case, and with all the projects we'll do, people who come in early on before the property's finished will have a share that's worth 30% more than they paid for it in the end. So there is also the investment aspect to it as well. And again, in terms of renting, if you're not having the management company can offset all those costs for rentals. So any time that you use that you're not renting out, you'd get between a 5 and a 6% return on what your share had cost. So 1 year, for example, if you didn't come at all, your income would be 5 to 6%. And there's a management fee which covers the bookings and looking after it and so on and so forth. And bills are shared out between the owners, but with a very good idea beforehand of what those bills are going to be. So again, experience helps here. I have got something that's happened to my contact lens. Any questions? No questions. I think one of the things with timeshare is that it's not really very well known generally, and gets confused with fractional ownership gets confused with timeshare. And obviously, it's very different. Typically, timeshare is overpriced for what you get, and you have to come the same days every year, which is obviously very limiting. And the idea of a fractional project is that you come when you want, and the owners take in turns. So someone who gets their first choice of dates year one, will go to the bottom of the queue year two. But the trick, I think, is to combine owners so that they have different requirements. So you combine people who want to be there in July and August with people who would rather be there in the winter and think July and August is too hot. In order to be equitable, though, unless owners want differently, in our case, we're actually going to split up the very high season weeks because they get the best rental income from Italians. What tends to happen with non-Italian visitors is that they would prefer shoulder season. So actually, they're more likely to want to come May, June, September, and October than they are July and August. And so, for example, an owner in the mix who has school-age children and has to come in July and August would be a good addition to a group who aren't interested in coming in July and August at all. Nuncia, any questions? Well, I've obviously been more comprehensive than I thought because nobody has any questions, which is a first. Okay, well, I have some other resources that I will send to people after this, and also details of projects we're running if people are interested. But as I said, oh, Puglia, essentially. So at the moment, the first project that will be ready so July next year probably is in Galatina in Puglia, which is a town with about 30,000 inhabitants. It's very lively year round. It's in the shortlist for City of Culture for 2028, with Helen Mirren having made a video extolling its versions, good restaurants, and a good mix of sort of foreigners and Italians, not overly touristy, beautiful basilica. Um, but Puglia generally. In terms of our projects, I wouldn't really go outside Puglia just because I've been restoring properties here for 17 years. I've got good teams of builders and architects and engineers and so on. And I know exactly what I'm doing, but also because in the redevelopment stage, you really need to be there every day. And that's not really feasible or desirable for me outside outside of Puglia. So because one of the advantages of not doing your own project is that in my case, I'm very experienced at keeping things on track and there not being unforeseen costs. Well, there are always unforeseen costs, but allowing a margin that will cover any unforeseen costs there are. The other thing that people are worried about in terms of security and all of that, we will absolutely work that people's funds are in escrow, and that they're released gradually. So people who are signing up now, um, nothing's happening with their money until we complete the purchase at the end of the year. So that's the situation. Sorry, this is really yeah, I'm a direct contact because this is my brainchild because um I'm sick of being the raining on people's parade because typically people get in touch. I always offer a free consultation and they'll say, I want 3 bedrooms and I want outside space and I want vaulted ceilings and my budget is 150,000. And it's just not doable. Um, for what a share will cost in our project, um, you couldn't even buy a 1 bedroom flat that needs work. And that's one of the beauties of the scheme because it's very accessible. What we have had on the previous project is some people buying more shares than they think they actually want to use just because of the uptick at the end. So doing part of it as an investment and part of it for their own use. Tina, I can send you details later if you would like me to. I'm happy to consult on fractional projects outside of Puglia, in terms of the contracts needed, the paperwork, and that sort of thing, but not actually do the restoration and manage the property at the end of it. Oh, not sure what you mean by what is the buy-in. Basically, we are counting a year as being 48 weeks, not 52, because obviously there's going to need to be some downtime for maintenance, but also there's some times of year which, if you allocated them as an owner, like January, other than New Year, it's the least nice time to be in Puglia. And most people would probably feel like they'd got the short end of the straw if they had that. And so at the moment, the entry point is two shares, which is 35,000 euros. And those two shares can be translated into room nights or exclusive use. So that's basically 2 weeks exclusive use, or it's a four-bedroom property. So basically, it divides into 3 units. And so you can actually have it as individual nights too. And nights will have a point value so that if you'll get longer than that if you're coming off season or if you're coming dates that other people don't want. So the idea was that it should be accessible to everyone. Obviously, you're not limited to two shares. First person in wants 4 shares, for example. Um, but that's basically it. There might be projects in the future which are more expensive, and there may also be projects that are cheaper, because I don't have anything against people wanting to share a two-bedroom apartment, for example, but in which case there would be less owners, maybe a maximum of 4 owners. Any other questions, anyone? Tina, is there a lot of fractional ownership in Canada? Normally, my experience is that people are wanting to buy, and then I'm saying, "What about fractional?" But not that they've already thought of doing this. I know that there's a lot come across. One of the first owners has a fractional ownership ski property in the States, and again came to me rather than me going to him. Okay, no, I get that. And I think that's what causes quite a lot of the confusion. I've had quite a lot of requests or a lot of interest from people wanting co-living. But that's a different kettle of fish. And I'd have to find the right property in order to make that work. With the one we're doing at the moment, there are three, it could be 3 units where they don't have their own front door, obviously bedrooms locked, but there's 3 different access points. And everyone would have basic cooking facilities, but on the ground floor, there's a very large kitchen and dining room, and on the roof terrace, there's a pool. So those areas would be shared. Um, but essentially, people could entirely do their own thing if they wanted. Um, I think yes. Essentially, you're buying shares rather than the property. So obviously, people buying shares will want to see the property, see all the due diligence and everything else. So we can arrange visits in the same way as if you were buying a whole property. Then, if you want to buy a share, you decide how many shares you want to buy. And then your funds go into escrow with an agreement about when they're released. So certain amount of funds will be released up and for the purchase, and then gradually as the work goes on, the change of shares, the price of shares will change. So obviously people who come in before the purchase and the first stage of the work will pay less than people who come in after because the property value goes up as we're working on it. So obviously once the property's been completely rewired and plumbed and bathrooms are added, it might not be immediately habitable, but it's already worth a lot more than it was at the start. And obviously, once planning permission has been approved as well, again, there's an uptick in the value of the property. So buying will be very much on a first come, first serve. There will be people who want to wait right until the end and pay the full price, and that's fine too. And we'll have a waiting list for those people. So essentially, people will be able to come in at any point, but the amount they pay and the return they get on the investment will be different depending on what stage they come. So again, it is like buying a property. So estate agents can sell shares, for example. You can market the property in exactly the same way, much the same as you can do with timeshares. Um, the difference is it's easier to get to the end with fractional ownership because you just need people who know how much of the year they think they want to spend there, but you've not got more or less desirable weeks because it's not linked to weeks or periods of the year in the same way that a timeshare is. So the buying's actually very straightforward, more straightforward than it will be to buy a property because you don't need a notary. There are law firms specialised in fractional who have all the relevant paperwork. So although we will tweak it slightly, all of that is sort of off the peg. So some people have been interested in potentially buying a share sight unseen. Others want to come and visit, which seems to me entirely fair enough. So we're at an early stage with this one, but we'll get going properly at the end of the year. And as I said, it's actually in quite good structural condition. So with luck and a following wind, it will be ready for next summer. This will end in about 5 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that. So if anyone has got any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. Obviously, if you have questions after the event, feel free to email me. And Tina, if you'd like me to, I can send you details about this particular project. So any questions? Oh, Galatina, Galatina. But I can do better than that. I wrote an article about it on my blog, so I can send you a link to that. And then also there is a sort of brochure for the project, which has photos of Galatina and details about that as well. So, and we also put a link to the Helen Mirren video because it's funny. I mean, I don't think it's intended to be funny, but I think it's funny. Any other questions? Well, you have all been absolutely exemplary because normally people wait right until the last minute to ask questions and then get cut off in their prime. But as I said, obviously feel free to email me any questions that you have after the event. Thank you very much for coming. And I will send you some information, probably not after this, but certainly by the end of tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.